Hello everyone, and welcome to the second part of building a full-stack MERN application, our memories project. If you haven't watched the first part, it is going to be linked in the description. Make sure to watch it first and then come back. These two videos alone are going to teach you how to effectively use the MERN stack to build projects. As I mentioned in the first video, I initially planned on putting this as the paid course, but I later decided to release it completely free for you guys here on YouTube. So, to support this video, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It shouldn't take more than a few seconds, but I really appreciate it. On another note, some of you in the comments requested me to add some extra features to this app, things like authentication, pagination, and more. If you'd like me to create a third part of this series where I add one of these features you requested, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. If this video reaches around 5 to 10k likes, we are recording part 3. With that said, let's jump straight into the project. We are now inside of the posts component. We are now successfully fetching the posts, and now we have to actually do something with them. So let's first form a nice looking grid. To do that, we're going to import grid and also circular progress from add material UI core. In here, we're going to say if not posts.length, then show circular progress. And that circular progress is just a loading spinner. And then we're going to put else. And then inside of here, we're going to create a grid of our posts. So that's going to be grid. And let's just do it like this for now. Let me explain this thing. So if there is no post.length, then return this, otherwise return this. This means that if post.length is 0, then 0 is falsy. This is going to make it to trudy, which means that we're going to show a circular progress. If post.length is something other than 0, for example 5, 10, 20, then this whole thing is going to be equal to false. Then we're going to show the posts themselves. Great. First of all, our grid is going to have a class name of classes.container. It's also going to be of a type container, so we're going to just put that there. We're going to say align items equal to stretch, and also set the spacing to be equal to 3. Great. Inside of there, we're going to use curly braces to indicate we'll be using JavaScript logic, and then we're going to loop over the posts. Posts.map, in a map we get a post, and then for each post we're going to immediately return something. Notice how I didn't put curly braces there, but rather just normal parentheses. Inside of here, we're going to return yet again a grid, but this time of type item. We need to close it like so. And now that grid is also going to have a few more things. First of all, a key. Key is going to be equal to post._id. It's going to stay as item. And then we can say XS, which means how large is it going to be on mobile devices, on extra small devices. It's going to take the full width, 12 spaces. On small and larger, it's also going to take 6 spaces. Great. And finally, inside of there, we have our post. Now, as props in the post, we'll be sending this post. That's it. As we are mapping with our real posts now, not generic ones, we can send that individual value of a post to each post component. Great. Now that that is done, we can go to a singular post component and implement the logic there. Inside of here, we're going to import a lot of things from Material UI. That's going to be card actions, card content, card media, button, and a typography. Again, from add material UI core. Great. Then we're also going to import some icons from Material UI. To do that, we're going to say import. That's going to be thumb up alternative, so just alt icon from add material UI, and then it's not going to be core, it's going to be icons and then thumb up alt. So make sure to copy this. In the description, you'll have access to the full code of this project. So if you just mistyped something or something doesn't work, just refer down the description and copy and paste it. Then we have import delete icon from add material UI. It's again not going to be core, it's going to be icons, and then / delete. Make sure it is uppercase D. And the last one is going to be import more horiz icon. There's an I there, and that's going to be imported from add material UI, icons, and then more horiz, just like that. With that out of the way, we can now start generating our JSX. To do that, we're going to have a card in here. That card is going to have a class name of classes.card. Inside of there, we're going to have card media, which is going to be just an image. It's going to be a self-closing tag, and it's going to have a class name of classes.media. Image is going to be equal to post.selected file. That's it. And finally, title is going to be equal to post.title. Okay, so we don't yet have the post, but we can immediately get it from props, considering we are pasting it right there. What we did here is we destructured the props like so. Great. Just down below, we have a div. That div is going to have a class name of classes.overlay. And inside of there, we're going to have two typographies. So typography 1, and then this one is going to have a variant of h6. And also it's going to say post.creator. So we're getting all data from the card. The second one, I'm going to copy this one, is going to be of body2. And this one is going to be about when the post was created. We can use that moment library we installed at the beginning. That's going to be import moment from moment. And now we can do it like this. Moment, we pass in that post.created add, and then moment has something known as dot from now, and you call it as a function. This basically says 5 minutes ago, 5 seconds ago, and so on. That's it. Below that, we're going to have a div, and this div is going to have a class name of classes.overlay2. Below that, we're going to have a button, or rather inside of that. That button is going to have a style of color white, like this. And then we're going to give it a size equal to small. And we are also going to add the on-click listener on it with nothing in it yet, just an empty function. That button is going to include the icon. So in there, I'm going to say more horiz icon, and we're going to give it a font size of default. Just like that, close it, and that's our button. Now below that div, we're going to have another div with a class name of details. Class name is equal to classes.details. That div is also going to contain a typography, so I'm going to copy this one first. The variant of this one is going to be body2. The color is going to be text secondary. And then in there, we're going to loop over our tags and add the hashtag before them. We do it this way. Post.tags.map. And then for each tag, we want to do something. And that something is return a string, where each string is going to start with a hashtag sign, and then immediately afterwards, tag. Make sure to leave one space afterwards. That's it. Below that, we're going to have yet another typography. This one is going to have a class name of classes.title. It's not going, the variant is going to be of h5. It's not going to have text secondary, rather it's going to have gutter bottom. Great, and inside of there, we're going to remove this and say post.message. That should have been in the card content, so I'm going to add card content right there and put that typography inside of there. Great. Finally, below the card content, we have card actions with a class name of classes.cardActions. Inside of there, we're going to have two buttons. They're going to be really similar. First one is going to be of size equal to small, also of color equal to primary, and it's going to have an on-click function. just like this. We're going to leave it blank for now. This one is going to have a thumb up icon. So thumb up icon. And the font size of that icon is going to be small, just like so. Next to it, we're going to say like, and next to it, we're going to add post.like count. In here, later on, we're going to have the like count. Now I'm going to copy that whole button. And in this one, everything is going to be the same, but this one is going to contain the delete icon. And also it's going to say delete, and we don't need the like count there. Okay, looks like we have one error, and that is that we are missing opening and closing curly brace there. Let's save it. And if we did everything correctly, our card should look pretty good right now. And this error is saying that we don't have access to Material UI icons. That means that Material UI icons is not part of the Material UI core. Then to get access to it, we're going to copy this part and simply install it. So close the terminal, run npm install, and then paste at Material UI /icons. Once that installs, we'll be able to run npm start and see how everything looks like. Let's run it. That's it. You can see we have a nice looking card with a lot of styles, overlay. We have also this created add function. We can click this button, which later that button is going to fill all of this input, so we'll be able to change it. And yeah, everything looks good. Right now, we don't have the functionality. We cannot edit, like, or delete, but this is the card. This is the CSS. Now we can keep on adding new cards and they're going to appear right there. Now is the time to implement all the other functionalities. There's one thing we can do before adding all the other functionality, and it's immediately going to make our application look so much better. Let's go back to code. Inside of here, in the src folder, create a new file called index.css. We have to connect that index.css to our index.js file. So let's do that here. Just say import /index.css. Inside of that index.css, we're going to add our SVG background. So let's go to Chrome, and you can visit this site, svgbackgrounds.com. In here, we have a lot of backgrounds. You can choose the one you like. For me personally, I chose this one. So let's click that, and then you can copy all of this CSS output. Let's take that and let's go back. Inside of the CSS file, we're gonna target our body and then simply paste everything we copied. That should work. Let's save it and go back. As you can see, that's it. Already looks so much better. Now onto the functionality. Next logical thing to do would be to implement the update route. So let's do just that. I'm gonna collapse our terminals right here and then go to server, routes, and then finally to posts. We can add a new route just below, and that's gonna be router.patch. Patch is used for updating existing documents. In here, it's not only going to be /, it's going to be /ID, and that's going to be dynamic, for the reason that we need to know the ID before we want to edit something. So for the editing, we need the ID. For the creation, of course, we don't, because we're gonna just add a new ID. But for updating, we need to know the ID of the existing post. And now let's call our new function update post. Of course, we'll be importing that from the controllers, and it would make sense to go ahead and create it. So now we can go over to controllers, and then in here, let's start with the creation of that new function. Export const update post. It's also going to be an asynchronous function, and as parameters, it's going to have request and response. First thing that we want to do is we want to extract that ID from request.params. So how do we know we are going to receive this? Well, if you remember, we set our route to be this. So that means that finally, once we make a request, the request is going to be made to posts and then 1 to 3. That 1 to 3 is immediately going to fill the value of ID. While using object destructuring, we can also rename our properties. And in this case, we're going to have to rename our ID to _ID, just like that. Moving further, we're going to do one simple check to see if this _ID is really a Mongoose object ID. To do that, we're going to add a simple if check, and there we're going to check if mongoose.types.objectID.is valid. In there, we pass in that _ID. So if it is not valid, we can add that not at the start. Then we simply want to return res.status of 404, and then we can say .send no post with that ID, just like that. On the other hand, if the ID is valid, then we can update our post. To do that, we're going to call our model, which is the post message, and we're going to call a method called findById and update on it. There we need to pass the underscore ID as the first parameter. As the second parameter or the argument, we have to pass the whole updated post. But where are we receiving the data for the updates? Well, we are receiving it from the request.body. So in here, we can say const post is equal to request.body. That is going to be sent from the front end. Now in here, we can pass that post. And finally, we have to specify new to be equal to true so that we can actually receive the updated version of that post. We can get that through here. Const updated post is equal to, and then this is an asynchronous action. So what we have to do is add a wait in front of it. Now we have access to the updated post, and also it is going to be updated in the database. Finally, we can do res.json and we can send over that updated post. That's going to be it for the update route and the controller. Now let's try adding the client side for the same logic. First, let's go into the components in the form because that's where we will be dealing with the update logic. In here, we have to somehow get the current ID of the post we're on. What does that mean? Well, if we go back to the page, in here you can see these three dots at the top right corner. That's going to be the edit button. Once we click that, we need to pass over the ID of this specific post to our form component. That way we can change this from creating a memory to editing a memory under this specific ID. So let's do that. This button is definitely under the post component. Moving on to posts and post. In here, let's find that edit button. And it looks like it's here. We have the styles for it, we have the size, and there is the on-click property, but you can see we left it empty. So in here, now we have to actually do something. We have to keep track of the current ID. To do that, we are going to go back not only to posts, but also to our app.js. In here, we're going to keep track of that current ID. Why in the app? Because we have to share that state of current ID between the posts and the form. And our app is the only parent component that is parent to both posts and the form. Now later on, we're going to refactor this to use Redux, but for now, let me show you how to do it with just plain React. In the app, we're going to import the use state hook, and then at the top, we can say const current ID and set current ID. Then we can use the use state and set the ID to be null at the start if we don't have the ID selected. Now what we're going to do is we're going to pass that current ID over to the form. So we say current ID is equal to current ID, just like that. And we are also going to pass the setter methods for that ID, both in here to posts and also in here to form. So set current ID is going to be equal to set current ID. And again, why are we doing this? Well, I want to show you how data management would look like without Redux. You can see you have to bring something all the way up to the app.js and then send it over to all the components. Of course, since we're sending it, that implies that we have to go over to the form and now accept these as props. So in here, we can destructure and then use that current ID as well as the set current ID. And just to stay consistent, we're also going to receive the set current ID inside of posts as props. Now inside of posts, we're going to pass that set current ID prop one more time, one level deeper to the post. And this is called props drilling. We are basically continuing sending the same prop over and over again to the most child component. And that's the exact problem that Redux solves. Great. Now that we have this, we can know that also in the post, we are going to receive that set current ID right here along the post. Finally, we are back where we were, that now on the on click, we can call that set current ID and we can set it to be equal to post._ID. Great. Now that is changing, and it's not only going to be changed in here, it's also going to be changed in the form, and also it's going to be changed in the app. So we wanted to bring that information over to the form. So if we go there, you can see now we are accepting that current ID inside of the form. What we're going to do now is in here, we're going to add one if statement. If we have a current ID, which means that if the current ID is not null, then we're not going to dispatch a create post. We're going to dispatch something different. And that something is going to be dispatch update post, just like that. But keep in mind, with update post, we need to know also the ID. So the post data is going to be the second parameter. The first parameter is going to be the current ID. And else, we are going to dispatch a create post. So if we don't have a currently selected ID, that must mean that we are creating a post and not updating it. That's great, but you know that currently this update post is not defined. So we have to go ahead and import it from here, update post. Not only that, we now have to go to /actions/post to implement it, but actions are using the API. So let's first go to the API. Inside of here, we're going to implement the API call for our update post route. That's going to look like this: export const update post. And in this case, you know that we're receiving two parameters. We're receiving in the ID, and also we are receiving in the updated post, or you can call it post data. That's going to be equal to an arrow function with an instantaneous return. And in there, we're going to have axios.patch. So to which URL will we be making that request? Well, it's going to be URL / and then ID. So for the first time ever, we not only have the URL, we also have the ID specified because we need to know what post do we want to update. And then as the second parameter, we are sending over the updated post. Great. Now we can go to actions. Inside of the actions, of course, we're going to create another function, which is going to be called update post. In there, we are receiving now two things, not just one, which is going to be the ID and the post. And then, of course, we have async dispatch. And then in there, we're going to have a try and catch block. Inside of the try, we're going to be making that API request to update the post. So that's going to be like this: await API.update post, and we have to pass over the ID and the post. What is this API request returning? Well, it's returning the updated memory or the post. So we can get the response here, but not only the response, we can destructure the response and immediately get the data. Once we have the data for the updated post, we can call dispatch. In there, pass in an action of type update. And also, we're going to be sending over the payload, which is simply going to be data. If you've been working with Redux for some time, then you know that it's usually a good idea to have action types set as constants and then to import them in these files. We're going to do that later in the video. I just wanted to lay that out for you who were expecting that. Great. Now, after we add the console log here, so console log error.message, you know what is the next step. After we do the action, we have to go to the reducers. So save this file and let's move over to the reducers posts.js. In here, we have to implement the case for the update post, or let's see, how did we call it? We called it just update. So in here, let's add a new case. That case is going to say update. So what do we want to do on the update? Well, in this case, we want to return something, of course, and that something is going to be posts.map. A quick question. Do you know what is the output of any map for that matter? So when we have array.map, what is the output of a map method? It is an array. So we'll be mapping over the posts array, we'll be changing something in there, and then we'll be returning the changed array. Inside of the map, we have a single post, and then what we'll do is we're going to have a ternary expression in there. We're going to say if post._id is equal to the action.payload. Keep in mind that action.payload is the updated post. So if the post ID is equal to the action.payload that underscore ID, then we want to return the action.payload. Why? Because that action payload is the newly updated post or memory. Otherwise, we want to return just the post as it was without any updates. That's it. Great. So what are the next steps? The next step would be to update the fields of the form with the values of the post we want to update. Of course, when you click this, we don't want to start everything from scratch. We want to have these values already in there, and then we simply want to update them. So that's our next step. To do that, we of course have to go to the form, and then in here, we have to fetch a new post. You already know how to fetch some data from Redux, right? We've been doing it so far inside of posts, if I'm not mistaken. Inside of here, we are fetching in the posts. So let's copy that use selector, and let's also copy this line. We can move that over to the form. And inside of here, let's first import that use selector from React Redux. I'm just gonna place it inside of here. And also, now we are fetching all the posts. But in this case, we don't want all the posts. We only want the data for the updated post. To do that, in here, we're not going to return all the posts. What we're going to do is we're going to have another ternary. And that ternary is going to say if we have a current ID, so if it's not null, then we want to loop over state.posts and we want to call a find method on them. More specifically, we want to find a post, let's call it P in this case, that has the same ID, so p._id, as our current ID, just like that. So this is going to make sure that we find only that specific post. If we don't have the current ID though, in that case, we just want to have null. And now we're not returning post here, it's simply going to be post because the find method is returning one singular thing. Great. So now that we have the data for the post, we'll just have to do one single thing, which is going to be first import useEffect, and now use that useEffect to populate the values of the form. We can use the useEffect like so, we just call it. It accepts two parameters. First one is a callback function, and the second one is called a dependency array. In here, we say when this callback function should be ran, when what changes. Well, when the post value changes from nothing to the actual post, then we want to run this function. And then in here, we're going to say if post exists, then we're going to set post data. And remember, that is our state field here. Set post data, and we are simply going to populate it with the data of the post. That's it. Let's save it and see if it works. Okay, we are back in here. Let me zoom this in, and I'm gonna click this button. There we go. The values are populated, and most of the work is done. And let's change some things. So first of all, I'm gonna type JavaScript mastery instead of JS mastery. Let's change this to New Year's Eve 2020. Let's hope it's gonna be good. And now I'm gonna add a new tag here, which is gonna be 2020. Now I'm gonna click submit. Looks like nothing happened, right? But let me refresh the page. As soon as I refresh, the changes are here. That's good. So the only thing we have to do is we have to initiate another get posts request after we update the post. Well, let's first implement a few different things, and one of these things is gonna fix that get posts immediately. First of all, once we're updating, let's change this to editing a memory instead of creating. That's gonna be as simple as going in here and then having the code in here. And the only thing we'll be doing is using a ternary. So if the current ID exists, then we want to return a string of editing. So in here, we're gonna have editing. And if current ID doesn't exist, then we're going to have a string of creating. That's it, as simple as that, and we don't need this $sign. Great, let's save it and see if that works. And now we have creating a memory. If I click this button, we have editing a memory. Great. The thing that we want to do next is once we click submit, we want to clear all the inputs because that memory is edited and we want to keep moving forwards and we want to have this back to creating. So to do that, we have to implement this clear function we talked about. Inside of the clear, first of all, we're going to set the current ID to be equal to null. So we're going to reset it back to null. And then also what we have to do is take all the default values right here. We have them in the state and simply update the state again. That's going to be set post data, and we're going to set it to everything at an empty string. Great. If I now save this, that should work. Going back, refreshing, and now let's try to edit, and let's just try sending JavaScript mastery 1, submit, and that didn't do it. Clear function is implemented, and if we start editing and I click clear, that works. But we also want to call clear function once we edit or once we create a new form. So that's gonna be clear right there, or even better, since we'll be using clear at both times, no matter the if or the else, we're gonna call it at the end right here. I'll save it and go back and see if it works. Okay, I'm gonna change this to JavaScript mastery 2 this time, and let's click submit. As you can see, this returned to normal, and in here, if I refresh, the post is going to be changed. Well, remember how I told you that emptying these values are going to actually immediately reset our posts so that we don't have to refresh the page? Well, for that, we just have to do one more step. And that step is going into the app.js and then changing this use effect from only having dispatch in here to having the current ID. Why is that going to work? Well, considering that we are now clearing the input, and clearing the input means changing the current ID. As soon as we change the current ID in the app is going to actually dispatch the get posts action. And that's going to make sure that on every change, we are going to get new posts. Let's save it and see if it works. I'm gonna click the edit button and change this back to JavaScript mastery without any number. Click submit, and it looks like it doesn't work. Well, there could be a few reasons. I just spent some time debugging this, and I found out that inside of our controllers, we are using Mongoose here, but we never actually imported it. So go ahead and go inside of the controllers, inside of the posts, and make sure to have this line. That's gonna be import Mongoose from Mongoose. Great. But not only that, we had one small mistake in this file as well. If you go right there, you can see that we are updating the post, where we are passing all the data we are receiving from the front end right there as the post. Well, what is a post? A post is an object that includes a title, maybe a name, message, tags, and everything else we've sent it. But we forgot to send over the ID as well, because in the database, each post has to have its own ID. So what we have to do is we have to create a new object, just like so, spread all of these properties from an object that we are receiving from the front end, and then also pass in that underscore ID. Now this is going to be our newly updated post, and in here, instead of the post, we can have that post with all the things, but only now we have the underscore ID as well. Now let's try to save it and see if that works. One more tip is that you don't have to refresh the browser once you make changes on the backend. If only changes you made were on the backend, you can just initiate a new request and don't have to refresh the frontend. So in here, let's say we go a bit into the future and let's say New Year's Eve 2025. I'm gonna click submit and let's see, this cleared out, but I don't see that the year changed here. I just noticed we're missing the title altogether here, so let's fix that. We can go to the post and then see where the title should have been. And we have the creator here, we have the time, and then the title should have been somewhere around here. There we go. Class is that title, and then that's post.message. But we never have post.title, right? So to fix that, we're going to add another typography just below the tags. We can even copy this one and then bring it above the cart content. Inside of here, this one is going to have a class name of classes.title, and we can leave everything as it is, but this time in here is going to be post.title, and this one, since it is a message, it's not going to have a classes.title class. Great, let's save this and see if it works. As you can see, we have the title. Now the last thing is to check if our update works. Let's change absolutely everything. So it's going to be JS Mastery now. Let's go to year 2030. Let's add a second exclamation mark. And in here, I'm going to change the tag to 2030 again. Click submit. And I spent about 20 minutes debugging it. And turns out it was just a small typo. Let's go step by step. First of all, I noticed that we are using Mongoose here, but we forgot to import it at the top. So let's do that. Import mongoose from mongoose. And I want to guide you through the process of how I was trying to discover the error. I just want to skip through the video or cut it out. I want to show you that errors are normal and that we need to be able to fix them. And let me show you that last error that we had, or at least I had, but it happens. So if you do this, and then if you change the title or the creator, you can click submit and open the console. After you open the console, you get a message from post.js line 30 saying cannot read property underscore ID of undefined. If you click that, you're going to notice that that's coming from actions. So now if you go to actions, you can see that line 30 is right here, error that message. And that's coming after we make this API request, which could make you assume that the error is actually coming from the backend. But it is not. And here's a great tip for you. Never console log error.message because then you're losing the information. Just console log the error and that's going to give you more info. So now let's do one more request to see what the error is going to give us. If we go here, try to edit the post, and then finally change this to JavaScript Mastery 2, click submit, and you should be able to see. Cannot read property ID of undefined, but now we get where at posts.js4. If you click that, it actually turns out to be the reducer. So let's go to the reducers. Inside of the reducers, that's gonna be line 4. And take a look. Cannot read property ID or underscore ID from action.paylad? What? Whole time the mistake was that there is a typo. So now I'm going to change this to payload, just as it's supposed to be. And I want to tell you that this happens. It's completely normal. So once you're going through the process, typos are going to happen, errors are going to happen, but you need to be able to solve them step by step by using console logs or any other method, as a matter of fact. Now let's hope that one more request for our update is going to be our final test. If we now go ahead here, let's try to change everything. JS Mastery, let's do New Year's Eve 2030. 2 exclamation marks, and let's change the tag to 2030. I'm gonna click submit, and let's see. There we go. All of the data was changed, and that's it. The message here is we need to be able to solve the errors and especially typos because they do happen. Next thing that we're going to implement is going to be the delete. So right now, if you click delete, nothing happens. Let's see why is that. Well, if you go into a post right there, and if you collapse this terminal so we can see better, you can see delete currently has no on click. Nothing is happening. That means that we first have to implement the backend logic, and then we're gonna connect that to the front end. So if we collapse all of this, in the server, first of all, as always, we're going to create a new route. The route is gonna look like this, router.delete. Great, and now we also need to have access to ID, same as with the update, because we need to know which post are we deleting. And then we're gonna call a function called delete post, just like that. Now we're gonna import it from the controllers, delete post, and then we can go to controllers to actually create that function. Inside of here, export const delete post. It's going to be equal to an async function that has request and response as parameters. And then in there, we also need to get this ID. So let's do that. Const, we get the ID from request.params. That's good. We're gonna copy this line because we need to make sure that the ID is valid. So I'm gonna paste that there. And finally, we have to implement the logic to delete a to-do. And that's going to look like this. Await post message dot find by ID and remove. And then in there, we can pass in that ID we are receiving from the params. Finally, we can return res.json where the message is going to be equal to post deleted successfully. Now that we have that route, we can go to the front end and actually initiate it. First of all, we're going to go to the API, and then in there, we're going to implement that API call. That's going to be export const delete post. In there, we receive only ID. This time, we don't have the updated post because we just deleted. And then we're gonna call axios.delete. We pass in the URL and / we also pass in the ID. Same thing we did in here with the Axios patch. Great, now we know that we can go into actions and there we can create our action creator. Inside of here, that's gonna be export const delete post. We take in the ID and then we have the async dispatch. And inside of there, we have a try and catch block. Since we don't need to pass in any data, inside of here, we're gonna await that API call. That's gonna be API.delete post. And we pass in the ID. Since we don't need the response of this, we can simply say dispatch and then pass in the type. That's going to say delete. And the payload can be the ID we want to delete. We don't need to do something like this. Const response is equal to this because we are not interested in the return data. We only want to delete it and that's it. And inside of here, we're gonna console log the error. Now, one more time, where do we go after we create an action? Well, we go to reducers. So in here, we're passing over the ID and that's gonna be under the type of delete. So inside of our posts, we have to implement that delete right here. And now what are we going to do when we delete something? Well, it's going to be really similar to the update, but just a bit simpler. We're going to return posts.filter. And in here we have a post and we're going to basically return all the posts, but we're going to filter out the one that we deleted. And that's going to look like this. If the post._id is not equal to the action.payload, in that case, we're going to remove it. So we're going to keep all the posts except the one where the ID is equal to the action.payload. Now that our reducer is done, we can go inside of the post and finally dispatch that action. Where do we do that and how do we do that? Well, first of all, we have to import that action. And since we don't have the reducer set up in here yet, we have to do that as well. We can do that by importing use dispatch, as we always do, from React Redux. Then in here, we're going to initialize the dispatch to be equal to that hook use dispatch. And we also have to import actions. So inside of here, we're gonna import delete post, which we just created, from /actions/posts. And finally, moving down, we can dispatch delete post. In here, we need to pass over the post._id. That's it. Now we did the whole circle of first doing the backend, connecting it to a component, creating actions, API calls, and reducers for the delete request. Great. Let's see if it works. Before we actually delete something, let's add a new card. Let's say that John went skydiving. So we're gonna put skydiving there and he's gonna say, it was awesome. Great. And in here we can do some tags. So let's do skydiving. I downloaded the image of a man skydiving and we're gonna submit it and let's do that. Great. As you can see, John is skydiving and it is awesome. Now let's try to delete the initial post. As you can see, nothing happened. So let's start debugging it. First of all, we're going to go into the controllers part of our server. And then in there, I want to see if the delete request was indeed made. So inside of here, I'm going to console log delete, just so we know that we reached this point in our code. Great. So if I now do that and then try sending another request from the front end, let's see what happens. We do get an error here, and the error says unhandled promise rejection warning, reference error _ID is not defined at delete post line 41. That means that in here we don't have the _ID. And yeah, that was just a small typo. In here I copied this line, but it should have been just the ID. So we're gonna leave the ID there, save the page, and then go back to the browser. If we go here and now press delete, let's see what happens. The post was successfully deleted. That's it. Amazing. Now let's add the ability to like the post. To implement the liking functionality, we have to do one full circle. And that's something I want to point out, is that once you have the proper structure set up using Redux, controllers, routes, that's extremely scalable. It's easy to keep adding new things onto it just by following structure. So now what we're going to do is, as we always do, follow the structure. First, we are going to add a router.patch request. And it's going to be to /ID and /like post, just so we know that this is the route for liking. Why is it a patch request if we said that patch request is used for updating? Well, if you think about it, liking something actually is updating it. It's updating the number of likes that the post has. So moving forwards, we add the function that's going to be like post, and we have to import it from controllers, like post here. Then we move over to controllers, and then in here we can create that function. Export const like post is equal to an async function where we have the request and the response. And in here we also have to get the ID, so we can do the same thing we're already used to. Great. Once we get that, we also have to check whether this is valid. So we're going to use this. Now, in this case, we first have to find the post we're looking for. And that's going to look like this. Const post is equal to await post message dot find by ID, and then in there we specify the ID. This is going to return us a post, and now we have the updated post, whereas const updated post is going to be equal to await post message dot find by ID and update, where we pass in the ID. And now this is the crucial part. As the second parameter, we want to pass in our updates. So that's going to be an object. In there, we want to increment the like count. So we're going to set like count to be equal to post.like_count. This post is the post we're fetching right here. And then what we simply do is increment by 1. And then with update requests, we have to specify the third parameter where we say that new is equal to true. This is inside of an object where new : is true. Great, that's it. And now we have access to the updated post. Below, that allows us to do rest.json and then in there, updated post. You can notice that this thing is really similar to the update post. Great. Now we're going to save that and let's move on to the front-end part. As always, we first have to add the API call, and that's going to be export const like post. We need the ID, and then we have an error function where we say axios.patch. This time the URL is going to be URL /ID, which needs to be a dynamic value, /like post, just like that. As always, once we have the API request, we can move over to actions, and in here, let's create the like action. Export const like post. We have the ID in there, and then finally async dispatch, where we have a try and catch block. Inside of here, we want to get the data of the newly updated post, and that's basically going to be the same as the update. So I'm going to take this whole part, paste it in here, and the only thing we want to change is from update post to like post. That's it. In here, of course, we're going to console log the error. Oh, and as well, you can see we have the error here. Since we're just liking, we don't have to have the post here. We just like it, and that's it. We don't have to provide what we want to do with it. That's it. Finally, we go to reducers, posts, and in here we have to implement the logic for liking posts. And the logic is actually the same as for the updates. That's why I said that these are really similar. So first we map over the posts, we check what is the one post that changed, or what is the one post that was liked, return the post with a change, or if the post is not liked, then just return the post as it was. Since they're completely the same, we could do something like this, where we copy the same thing and then we say like. But what we can also do is just put two cases, one below each other, and then they both are going to do the same thing. Finally, we can go to posts and then the post component. And in here with the delete post, we also want to import like post. Moving below to our button, we just need to add an on click, which is going to say dispatch, like post, and then in there, we send over the post._id. That's it. Let's see if it works. I'll try to like this post. As you can see, we have one like. With our current implementation, one user can like a post as many times as he wants. If we want to give users the ability to like the post only once per account, we have to implement accounts. What does that mean? That means that we need the full authentication system. We need registration, we need login, we need to allow users to reset their passwords, create accounts, and do everything else. That's usually called authentication. You guys can try to implement that by yourselves, but if you feel like you cannot, just let me know. Feel free to like this video, leave a lot of comments, and if this video goes well, I might even do the third part where we're going to add authentication to this MERN project to make it even more complete. Currently, we're fine with the ability for users to like the post as many times as they want, so that is completely fine. With that said, let's move forwards with our app. What else do we need to do to make our app better and our code more professional and presentable? Well, first of all, I noticed that we have a slight mistake here. The title and the description have the same font or the same styles. So let's go ahead and change that. You can go to the post.js, and then inside of the post.js, that's gonna be somewhere around here. Typography, this is the body 2. That's not what we're looking for. There we go, post.created that. We're looking for the title. There we go, post.title, that is it. And then in here, we have post.message. What we want to do for the message is we want to make it a variant of body 2, and we want to give it a color of text secondary, just like this. And we can also say component is going to be equal to P. It's a P tag. And we don't need this gutter bottom. If we go back and refresh the page, we get it was awesome. Let's add some more tags and some more words to the description so we can see it better. In here, I'm going to initiate our edit, which now fully works. I'm going to remove this exclamation mark, and I'm going to say it was awesome. This was the first time I skydived ever. Great experience. Just like that. And we can say skydiving 2020, great time, just like that, and click submit. As you can see, now this looks so much better. Our card now has the title, description is properly styled, and we have some hashtags right there. And I noticed one more thing to make our app just a bit better. Currently, our tags are not working as they're supposed to. As you can see, they're all kinda the same hashtag, right? Even if you try to change them and then add spaces, it's still not going to be many different hashtags. So later on, if we want to implement like search posts by hashtags, this is not gonna work. What we need to do to make it work is go back to our form and change the way we save our tags. That's gonna be in the form folder and then in the form component. And that's going to be around here. As you can see, this text field is used to save tags. Currently, we're just saving them as a string. What we want to do though is do eTarget.value. This is a string of tags. We want to call the .split method on it. And we want to split it into an array by a comma. So in here we are saying split this string by commas, no space afterward, and then give me an array of all the tags. If we now save this and go back, we should be able to edit this into a fully functional post with hashtags. Let's take a look. We are back in here. I'm gonna click edit, and now I'm gonna try putting all of these just as tags with comma separated values and click submit. There we go. This looks so much better. Now we have 3 different hashtags, skydiving 2020 and great time. It's great. In regards to the cards, I think our work is done. We can add a few more cards just to get a feel of how this looks like. As you can see, I added one new card. It is New Year's Eve 2019. James said that it was the best New Year's Eve ever and that he was in Times Square. Amazing. So our cards look pretty good. We can like them, we can delete them. I just noticed like we need to add a space in here between the like, the icon, and the number. So let's do that right now. For that, we're going to go into Post right here and then find where is our like button. You see, we could add a space here and here, but that's not going to do anything. That's not going to be interpreted by our JSX. What we need to do is add a code for the space character. It is AND NB SP semicolon. This is the same as you wrote a space character, but we need to use that in here. So let's add that just before the like and also after the like. I think this is gonna be good. Let's test it out. Save it and go back to the browser. As you can see, this is much better. We have some more padding in here and we can like the post. We're moving on to an incredibly important thing, and that is our website or the application mobile friendly? Is it responsive? For that, you can right click and click inspect. This is going to open the responsive view. To view it in a mobile device, click here into responsive and choose a phone. Let's choose iPhone X. And would you look at that? This application is responsive out of the box because we were using Material UI. Did you think we're going to have to do a lot of work to actually make this accessible for mobile devices? Well, that is not the case. As you can see, the application is fully responsive, both the form and the cards. The only thing we could do is put the form on the top of the screen for mobile devices, because as you can see, currently it's kind of buried down there. How would we do that? Well, let's take a look. The form is currently in here, and that is inside of this container, Material UI container. So what we would need to do is change this container into display flex, like this. Give it a flex direction of column, but I think it already has that. And then I think we can do flex direction, flex direction, column, reverse. That's what we want to go for. As you can see, that didn't do it. I'm guessing because there is another container inside of there, so maybe we need to be changing this one. This one is for the cards, as you can see, but this is the one we want to be targeting, not the one above, rather just this one. So in here, I'm gonna do flex direction, and that's going to be column, reverse. And would you look at that? Our form just moved to the top. So now if we have 10, 20, or 30 cards, you wouldn't have to scroll, you just have to put the form at the top. So this was the Material UI spacing 3 grid. So if we go back to the code, I'm just gonna search for spacing is equal to 3 because that's what our container has. And that is currently in here in the app. Our app is wrapping our posts and the form. So the only thing we have to do in here is something like flex direction. And then let's try to do column reverse. We'll see if that works. I'm not sure if they have built-in property for flex direction. If we save it and go back, let's see if that worked. Unfortunately, it didn't. At this point, I would just go into the Material UI documentation and take a look, but let's give it just one more shot. Let's try with just direction instead of flex direction, because in here you can see it's just justify, just align items. So maybe, who knows, that works. And looks like it did. Would you look at that? Material UI is really intuitive. But we don't want this to happen for desktop devices, so we only want to apply this if we are on mobile. Because of that, I'm going to copy this and simply give it a class name. So we're going to say class name, and this is going to be something like classes that a main container, just like that. Now we can go into our styles of the app.js. Let's take a look. That is right here in styles.js. And then in here, we can say main container, do it like this as an object. And then in there, we want to do flex direction, and that is going to be equal to column reverse. But how do we do that only on mobile? Material UI offers something known as breakpoints. They are simply media queries. So the only thing we have to do to make this work is put the array sign, and then in there, we're gonna say theme dot breakpoints dot down. And then you call it as a method, and then in there you say SM. As you can see, we have SM, XS, medium, large, and extra large. So in here, we're basically saying run the CSS after this only for the devices that are small, or even smaller than small, like extra small. And then in here, we can move all of our styles that we have here. And that is it. As you can see, our theme is not being declared, so we have to import our theme right here, make styles, theme. Again, if you're not familiar with what is happening right now, it is just from the docs. You can go ahead and research Material UI into a bit more details, or I can create a fully separate video on Material UI. If you'd like me to do that, feel free to leave a comment down below. So, in regards to the mobile friendliness, we are fully done. Works on mobile and works on desktop. That is great. If you want to, you can make it work on tablets as well. There shouldn't be a lot of problems, but this is good for now. Our next step is not going to add new functionalities to the app or make it look better. It's going to make our code look better and be more professional. If you're employing for jobs and if you put the code on GitHub, you want to make it as good as it can be. No errors, no silly indentations all around the place like this, or spaces running around. You want your code to be as professional as it can be, because later on you're gonna work in themes. So what people often do in Redux is they add constants for their action types. Currently, if we close all of this, so close all the files and collapse the file tree by clicking this icon right there, we want to go to Client and then Actions right here. Take a look. We have all of these strings right here. This is a string, this is a string. All of our action types are indeed strings, right? So, what do you think would happen if, for example, I misspell this from fetch all to fetch all, like this? There is a typo, but maybe while you're coding, you don't see it. Of course, this would break our application, but here's the catch. Take a look. There is no error. And even if you go to the browser, you would see, okay, it's not loading, something is not working. And even if you went to the inspect element, you wouldn't be able to find any errors because there are none. You simply misspelled a variable. But it's not like this. It's not like when you have a variable const test is equal to test, like this, and then you want to do a console log test and then you misspell it here, like this. It's not the same situation because in here, it's immediately going to say this variable doesn't exist. There is an error. But it's tricky working with strings, right? So this is why people have figured they're going to create constants for these action types. So how can we do that? Well, we're going to create a new folder in our src folder called constants. Inside of our constants, we're going to create a new file called action types.js. And then inside of there, we're going to create a lot of separate variables for these strings. Fetch all, create, we need more for update, delete, and everything else that we have. So if we go to action types, so in here, we're going to start creating all of these variables. Const create is going to be equal to create. Const update is going to be equal to a string of update, all uppercase. Then we have delete. Const delete is equal to delete, like this. We have const fetch all is equal to fetch all. And then we finally have const like is equal to, of course, you guessed it, an uppercase string of like. Of course, we don't want to have this here because as you can see, we are never using it. So what we want to do is we want to export all of these. So we can do it like this. Export const create, update, delete, fetch all. And now we will be able to go to posts and then import all of these types or action types right there. Right before the first line, I'm going to say import, open curly braces, fetch all, create, update, delete, and like. We're importing all of these from / constants / action types, just like that. And now what we're gonna do is in here, instead of this string of fetch all, we're simply going to use this variable. The same things go for create, update, like, and delete. Make sure not to misspell something, but let's add all of the variable names right there. Oh, it looks like we used the update for like as well, so it looks like we don't need the like after all. I'm going to get rid of that, go to action types, and remove the like. So now, here's the thing. If you misspell something like this, it's immediately going to give you an error. This might seem like a lot of work to actually implement this, import it, and then use it here, but really, trust me, if you misspell a string here, you can spend hours and hours looking for an error and you won't be able to find it easily. But with this, you're just making your code less error prone and more scalable. As you keep adding more controllers, more actions, more reducers, you'll just keep adding different variable names. And not only that, we can use these same action types we used here in our reducers because they are the same. So in here, I'm also going to import the same thing, and then we can change all of these to our normal variables. I'm just going to remove this, and let's do it like this. Fetch all. Looks like in here we do have the like case, but we are using only the update, so we don't really care about that. Great. Now we implemented constant action types, and we just made our code much more scalable and much less error prone. If we go back to our application, it should still work just as fine. Great, that is done. Let's move back to our code and let me show you one of the final things I want to show you on this project. Again, we're going to close everything, collapse it, and this time we're going to go into our server, more specifically the index.js file of the server. We have this connection string right here. We also have the port right here. And if you think about it, in this string, you can see our username, you can see the password of our user, and you can also see the name of the database. That info should not be publicly available. You shouldn't be posting your project on GitHub like this. This needs to be stored somewhere where other people cannot have access to your passwords or secret API keys. So how can we fix that? The only thing we have to do is create one new file in our server.js, and that is going to be called .env. env stands for environmental variables, and these are files that are only going to be accessible in here on your PC. These are not going to be posted on GitHub. So now in this file, you can add all of your variables. For example, let's start with the port first. The only thing you have to do is take this port, and that is going to be the name of your variable. Then, followed by an equal sign, you can specify the value for the port. Now, this value should be 5000, but let's change all the other values. We're also going to take our connection URL. So connection URL is going to be equal to this string. I'm gonna copy the string and paste it right here, and that is going to be equal to connection URL. Of course, with an equal sign and without the string signs, just like this. For these variables to be visible by our application, we need to install something called .env. So you can press npm i.env like this. Once we save that, our application will be able to read the process env variables. That is installed, and let's run our application. Even if you didn't install it, or if you had it before, you still need to press Ctrl+C to close the server and then start it again for the variables to actually take place. Finally, we have to import .env from .env, and then we have to call just at the top .env.config, just like that. Let's save it and see how it goes. This is saved, our server is running on port 5000, and if we go back to our application, you can see everything works perfectly. How can we know we are changing something? Well, let's try to console log this port. Or even we can just change it and then you'll be able to see it in the console right away. I'm gonna say 10,000. If we do that, save it and rerun the file, it's still saying server running, let's see. Yeah, it immediately changed, server running on port 10,000. We don't want to do that because that would break our application. Our frontend is expecting localhost 5000. So let's go back and change it to 5000. Now we are securely storing our connection URL inside of our .env. And since our .env is not going to be saved on our GitHub, what I like to do is I like to do .env.example. This file is going to be published to GitHub. So in here, we can give an example of what all people need to have in their environments for this to work. So in here, we're gonna say Mongo URL string, and then in here at the top, we can just say port. That way, they know that they have to add their own thing in here for this to work. Great. Now our application works, and it works really, really well. People can create memories, edit memories, like them, delete them. It is a fully functional CRUD application. The last thing we have to do is, of course, deploy it to the web. Deploying backend is gonna be just a bit harder than deploying the frontend, so let's start with that. For deploying the backend application, or rather the API, we will be using Heroku. Heroku is great for hosting servers. You can visit heroku.com and then you can sign up or log in just at the top right. I just logged in with my account and I see I already have some projects right there, but we're gonna start with a completely new one. So this page should be empty for you if you're using Heroku for the first time. If that is the case, you can click this new button at the top. And then we're gonna say create a new app. After you do that, it's going to ask you for the app name. We're going to say something like memories-project, just like that. And then below you can choose a region. Now I'm gonna click create app. Looks like our app is generated, and now all you have to do is follow the steps right here. First, you have to download and install the Heroku CLI. You can do that if you click that button, and there you should be able to see it. You can install it for macOS, Linux, Ubuntu, and also Windows. So just go ahead and choose your own installer. After you install it, I think we should be able to go into the console and type Heroku-v. This is going to give us the version we are running. Now let's do as they say, Heroku login. In here, Heroku login. Of course, you have to quit your application and then you have to be located in the server folder. I'm gonna run Heroku login, and then it's going to say press any key to open the browser to log in. It's going to prompt you to log in to Heroku CLI, you can do that. And then after it says logged in, you should be able to continue with the process. You don't have to cd into my project because we are already inside of the server directory. If you're not, make sure to navigate to there. And when we are in there, we have to initialize a Git repository. So you can do that by doing git init. Finally, let's follow the next command, and that is going to be Heroku git remote, and then you have to add that to your remote. Again, just copy and paste the commands that you're getting right here. Now, the process is going to be just a bit different. We have to modify a few things before we add everything. Let's first start by our index.js. In here, I'm going to add one greeting route. So as soon as you come to your application, we have to have something. So that's going to be app.get. And then in here, that's going to be just slash. And we always have rec and res. And then in here, we're going to do res.send. And let's do hello to, and this is going to be memories API like this. Great, this is just something we're gonna see once you go to the actual deployed version. Now, we do have to make a few more changes. First, you can see all node modules, everything is added to your Git. As you can see, 1000 changes. You don't want to do that. You want to move your node modules away from your GitHub. So in here, I'm gonna create a new file inside of the server folder, and that file is gonna be called .gitignore. Like this. And then in there, we're simply going to add our node modules. Now you're going to see this is going to be removed, and from a few thousands, now we have only 10 files to be uploaded. Usually you would put the .env file right there, but we won't be uploading this to GitHub. We will only be pushing this to our Heroku. And in this case, Heroku has to know about our env. So we're going to leave this right here, and we're going to remove the port because Heroku is going to add the port themselves. So the only thing we need is connection URL. If we go back to the index.js, let me explain what I was saying. In here, this process.env variable is going to be populated immediately by Heroku. Finally, there is one file we have to add, and that file is called proc file. So in there, you can specify proc file with the first letter being capital. Save that. In there, we can type web npm run start. This is going to enable Heroku to start the application as soon as it is deployed. Great. I think that's it. I know we changed a lot of things, but sometimes during the deployment process, you have to make some adjustments. I think that's going to be it. So we can close all files, and now we can finally push it. So we have to do git add dot. Then we have to do git commit and then just do any commit message. In here they say make it better. And the last thing is git push Heroku master. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. And there we go. Let's hope it's going to be deployed. It is going to start building right now. There we go. Installing the dependencies, installing node modules, building, and hopefully it's going to be up and running really soon. As you see, build succeeded. And there we go. It says it's released. We can go back to our browser, and then under the overview, you should be able to see that our project was built successfully and that it is deployed. Now, if we go right there to the open app, you should be able to see it. I'm going to click open app, and there we go. At the top left, we get hello to memories API. This doesn't have to look pretty because this is just data. Remember, if we go to /posts, we should be able to see all the posts that we have. Currently, we have 4 posts in our API that are being fetched from the database. To finalize things, we have to go to the client side, inside of the SRC, and then inside of our API. In here, we have to change this URL to stop fetching things from localhost 5000 because that is local, and we have to copy this whole URL, memories project, and then /posts, just like that. In here, you're gonna have to type your own thing, just copy and paste it from your browser when you load in the Heroku project. Now, if we save this, we should be able to go back and possibly see everything in the app. As you can see, here are our projects. And now I'm going to delete this test one, and it should be immediately reflected after refresh in here, in the actual deployed API. And there we go. There is no 4th post. For testing purposes, let's add one more post, and that's going to be test, 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 and test. I added the test image as well. I'm going to click submit, and the post is added. You can see it right there. But if we go back right here, and if we collapse all of these things, you should be able to see it was immediately reflected in our live deployed backend. And we can even know that it's not picking things from our local backend, because in here, take a look. Local backend is closed. It is not running right now. That means that the whole backend is running on this live deployed API on Heroku. And finally, the last thing for this app to be fully deployed is to get rid of this local run of the client side as well. So we have to deploy the client side as well. Deploying client side is going to be easier than deploying the backend. We will be using Netlify. It is a great tool that allows you to deploy your front-end applications in a matter of seconds. You can log in or sign up, and then in here, we'll be able to deploy our front-end. This is going to be empty for you. I already have some projects, but you can go ahead and click sites right here. After you do that, you will see something that looks like this. This should be empty for you, but take a look at this empty rectangle at the bottom. Want to deploy a new site without connecting to Git? Drag and drop your site folder right there. And that's what we're gonna do. Going back to our application, I'm going to stop the server from running and then run the npm run build right into our client folder. This is going to generate a built version of our React application that we'll be able to deploy on Netlify. It is going to take some time. I'm going to skip this video and we'll be right back. Our build is now generated. You can see right here in the client, we have access to this build folder. Now you're going to right click it and then click Reveal in Finder or Open in File Explorer on Windows. After you do that, your folder is going to be opened and the only thing you have to do is drag and drop the build folder right inside of here. That is deploying right now, and maybe even as I speak, this should turn green. There we go. It took about 3 seconds. Now you can click this and that's going to take you to deployed React application. There we go. Our posts are right here. Our application is deployed. We are no longer dependent on running our servers. We can completely close this. We are not running anything. This is live on the web. And we can even change the URL. So if you go into domain settings and then options, you can edit the site name right there. So let's try with something like memories _ or just -app. Looks like that is available. And there we go. Frontend is deployed, backend is deployed. They're all working together for us to be able to create, edit, delete, and update the posts. That's it for this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a part 3. To make sure not to miss the next video, subscribe, and more importantly, turn on all notifications by clicking the bell icon. Stay safe and see you in the next one.